If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.
Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Must Love Books. Hello and welcome back to Must Love Books podcast. Today I am here with a bookstagrammer who is a former non-reader, currently finding a love for reading in adulthood. Please welcome Marcella Baugh. Marcella, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you on. I love featuring bookstagrammers on my podcast. You are my third one this year so far. And I just love having you all on here to just talk about our love for books and some important topics related to books.
I am always ready to talk about books. I'm one of those people at a social gathering, I will always have an unsolicited book recommendation or any genre. So I think that sometimes people get tired of it, but they know that when I'm there, the topic is going to veer towards books at any point.
And that's something that I also relate to very heavily. Always have a book, or at the very least, my Kindle is always in my purse. So there's some sort of book within reach wherever I go at any given moment.
Yeah. So I've always found my advice to people who have hard times in social situations, big social gatherings, is to bring a book or your Kindle, because it's a little more socially acceptable to be reading a book than it is to be staring at your phone. Makes sense? So whenever you're reading a book, they'll leave you alone, right? They'll be like, oh, they're reading, that's fine. But if you're staring at your phone, or you're maybe even if you're reading on your phone, people still feel like they can come in and interrupt you. So if you need a social break, bring a book to a social gathering.
Yeah, I can definitely see that reading is more acceptable, whereas fidgeting on your phone or even just reading from your phone, it looks you're just fidgeting on your phone, is seen more as being antisocial. But at least, reading a book, you're doing something.
Yeah, which it just sends a different signal to people's brains.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you are really just kind of looking for a little bit of a break, you need to recharge a little bit, or, maybe you're just not really in the socializing kind of mindset at the moment, just read a book.
Yeah. One of the great things about being a bookstagrammer and being an advanced reader copy reviewer is that sometimes I really can use that as an excuse. Be like, you know what? This book comes out tomorrow and I really do have to finish it. So I'm sorry, I have to leave. I'm so sorry. Books are always in the conversation wherever you go.
And the way I see it is, let's have more reading in public anyway. Anything that can encourage other people to, think about books, talk about books, or go out and pick up books of their own to get into reading. I am all for it. More books everywhere, please.
Yes. I love the rise of here in Utah. We have a lot of indie bookstores that are just popping up everywhere. Just within me, there are 5 indie bookstores within 10 minutes of me. And it's just really cool to see people supporting not only local businesses, but also supporting books and reading books and getting more into reading.
You had mentioned that you were reading The Anatomy of Peace and how this book really changed perspectives for you.
Yeah. So when I was, it was 20, and The Anatomy of Peace was a book. Before I started reading more broadly, it was basically exclusively reading nonfiction, which I feel like is a phase that people go through. You only read nonfiction because that's the most useful reading, right? But I read The Anatomy of Peace And with everything that was happening in the world, I just kind of was, I don't want to feel like I'm fighting against everything anymore. I just want to move forward in what feels the most like love to me, while still being in touch and understanding the events that are happening in the world. And so it changed my perspective on how to treat people with, I guess, differing opinions. And I say that in a way that there are opinions that I believe that can be harmful, right? But even if they're harmful, I don't have to be harmful to them as an individual. For me, looking back, reading it, if I were to go back and read it now, I think that I would see, for me now, it's not as impactful as it was then. Does that make sense? Just because who wrote it and the topics in it and how it's written and things like that. Yeah. But hindsight is always, you learn and you move forward.
And now you focus on reading a lot of fiction books, and you particularly focus on diversity and representation in books.
The one thing I love is finding different authors and diverse authors, because, I mean, if you look at, these big publishing houses and what's being marketed and pushed really hard, they are most of the time not really diverse. It's kind of the same author over and over again. One example of this is if you go and even look at the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I know that's the readers, but if you're only getting what's accessible to you, that's easily accessible. If you look at the Goodreads Choice Awards, there's almost no authors of color within those nominees. Even the winners, there's maybe a few that are of, different diverse backgrounds. And so it's frustrating to know that if we are just going to read what's fed to us, we're only going to get one perspective and one point of view. That's why I love reading diversely, because it just opens you up to so many different things.
The Goodreads Choice Awards, the winners were exactly what we expected them to be. And that's because it's focused entirely on popularity. And what books are more popular right now? Well, just take a look at Book Talk and compare that to the Goodreads list, and you've got your list right. I think what's really important is that we dive in and address why these books are more popular. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are better written. It just means that they were promoted more. And so why are these books being promoted more? Well, that lies on the publishers themselves. And I do think that there is some blame to be placed there, of course. But the blame is also on us as readers for not taking the initiative. And I'm not saying all readers are like this, of course, just if you are like this, this applies. And if you're not like this, then doesn't apply to you. But if you're a reader who isn't actively seeking out diverse books, you're only going to see what is, the most popular, and they are generally written by white and straight authors. So the onus is on us to really step up.
And I think that that's really important to say that, books are for readers, right? For us to purchase and to move publishing and stories to the way that is more reflective of the world, and move publishing and to reflect readership more, we have to be willing to put our dollar and our money towards those types of books. The frustrating thing about that is that within publishing, you can see that people have their biases. And if you look at these large publishing houses, they're going to promote books that they relate to, that they really love, and the stories that they really love. And so kind of telling who is at the top of publishing. And so once those positions reflect readership a lot more, I think that we'll get a lot more diverse reading. But the only time that will happen is if we as readers tell the publishers what we.
Absolutely. I see it as a two-pronged issue, and that is, the publishers need to push more diverse books, but they're only going to push what they think is going to sell. It's not necessarily about what is the best book. It is about what they think is going to make them the most money, because publishing is a business.
Yeah.
So for readers, if we're not actively seeking diversity in what we read, the publishers aren't going to push diverse books out for readers. So, we're kind of battling each other in the sense that, yes, we need publishers to push diverse books so that we find them and we read them. But publishers aren't going to push those books until we demand them.
Yes.
And once, the more that we demand diversity in what we read, the more publishers will step up and make that more available, because in the end, publishers want to do what is going to make them the most money. So it is up to us to show them that diverse books make money.
Yes. And I think that one thing that is interesting is if you kind of look at sales of diverse books, and there are a lot of trends that happen, but they mostly revolve around tragedies. If you look at 2020 and everything that happened in 2020, people were looking for Black authors because they wanted to learn from those Black authors. And I think that's one of the problems, in the sense that we are always looking to diverse authors to teach us. And I don't think that that is the responsibility of a person of color, to teach somebody else how to be empathetic. I think that you can learn that from reading diversely. And if you already are reading diversely, then you won't have to look to somebody else to teach you empathy, because that'll already be in your wheelhouse. People are wanting to learn more. But the unfortunate thing is that it's being capitalized upon and monetized by publishers. And although it's great, I think that it does bring up this issue of, why aren't we already reading those things? Why don't we already have those accessible? And why do publishers have to wait for a tragedy to happen to push a book by an author of that background?
It kind of brings up another point on how even when publishers did focus on pushing diversity in books, which was related to the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, we did see publishers seemingly make the effort and seemingly push more Black authors. Mm-hmm. However, they really focused on stories rooted in tragedy, in racism, and it was almost, they were maybe, I don't know if it was intentionally, but at the very least, it was an implicit bias that the industry never really addressed. And that was that Black stories are only worth telling if they can capitalize on tragedy.
Yeah, that is one thing that is across the board, I think, really prevalent in publishing and marketing of authors and stories that are from perspectives of people of color. There always has to be some sort of trauma and tragedy to it. One of my favorite nonfiction books is How to Read Now by Elaine Castillo. I think she's just one of the most intelligent authors we have right now. She is Filipino, and her book talks about this idea of, we are always looking to authors of color to teach us empathy. And then what do we look to the white authors for? Are we looking to the white authors to tell us stories and to take us away and for the art and the beauty? Why aren't we also looking at authors of color that way? Because if you are wanting to see the world and see the beauty in the world, then there would be more of those stories. Instead of just looking towards authors of color whenever there's a tragedy and you want to understand something more, why not read diversely so that you can see the entire world and see the beauty that is in it?
In my opinion, the best way to experience other culture, other mythologies is not through like looking at them to teach you, but just experiencing them through reading. Black romance doesn't have to teach us anything. It can just exist, and you can still learn about experiences that are outside of your own just by having those characters exist as they are, as real people do, instead of using them as a tool to learn from. You know, just allow you, being entertained by different cultures is really a great way to experience them.
Yeah. I mean, there's art and beauty everywhere. Right?
Exactly.
If we're only looking at art from one point of view, then we're missing out on so much that the world has to offer, and so much that just the human experience has to offer us, and what we can learn and see and grow from, right? I guess one thing that you brought up, the idea of reading Black authors or reading different perspectives, I think that for me, as a person of color, I have always been reading outside of my perspective. I always read the books that became really popular, like when I was a teenager. Harry Potter was really popular, Twilight, and Hunger Games. So I have always read outside of my perspective. I've always read from a lens of somebody else. And so for me, I feel like to read diversely is a lot more comfortable because I've always read from a different perspective. But for a lot of readers that are not people of color, I think that it does come with some discomfort. And this idea that you're going to read from a perspective that's not your own. And if you haven't already been doing that from the beginning of your reading, it's going to take time to be able to feel comfortable within those stories and to be able to understand that the world doesn't revolve around one perspective.
It really just shows what the issue is with white being considered the default. And so because of that, as a result, white readers often, you're right, have never had to actively be outside of their own perspective because their perspective has always been centered. Whereas for non-white readers, it's just always been considered to be the norm to read outside of their perspectives.
I just think about this. I think about Hunger Games and the cultural shift that happened after Hunger Games and how many people refer to Hunger Games during times of political distress. But you're talking about oppression and class from a perspective of a white author. I'm not trying to hate on Hunger Games. I think Hunger Games is great. I love the series. But I am saying that sometimes it lacks the nuance that these real life political issues have. But I also believe that if we're going to write stories about oppression, about rising against a power that is trying to oppress you, then maybe we should understand that a little more deeply from societies and cultures that have constantly experience those things. Just even right now, if you look at the political climate of the United States, there are so many things happening, right? And if you look at Bookstagram and you look at all of the things that people are referring to, the books that people are referring to, saying look at this book is about oppression, this book is about book banning, the majority of them are from white authors. And I think that there's something to be said about that in the sense that yes, those books are impactful. You can read them and you can learn a lot from them. But also there are other stories out there that might help you understand what's happening in the world a little bit better.
For example, the big one that is being discussed right now, and partially because it continues to be relevant, is Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I do have an appreciation for that book. I think it is an extremely profound and impactful story. But the mark that people keep missing is, yes, there are parallels today to The Handmaid's Tale. However, everything that was written in that book has happened to people of color throughout history. And that's something that even the author herself has said is the things that happen in this book come from history, come from real events and real experiences from non-white communities. And by applying those things to a white main character, then all of a sudden white readers were able to relate to it and, picture themselves in that perspective. However, Handmaid's Tale is not the first or only book to touch on these histories and touch on these themes and parallels. Read some Toni Morrison, read some Octavia Butler, two both absolutely phenomenal authors who have been writing about these themes for many
years,
whose entire careers were devoted. But which book is it that authors are talking about now? It's Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. And again, I think that one of the reason why is because, again, people are not used to reading outside of their own perspective. I personally believe that in order to reach as many people as you can and affect as many people and have people latch onto a message, you need to say it in a way that people will be able to digest it. There's nothing wrong with white authors. There's nothing wrong with them being revered for their writing and having them be referred to as people who have changed literature and things like that. I think the problem is that when we only refer to them, that we only talk about them, that's when we lose so much of the nuance that could happen and the conversations that could happen. And I guess the things that we could see and the things that we can learn as human beings, when we only refer to one perspective, that's when we lose everything else.
Absolutely. And, I think the way that we need to encourage people to look at it is, yes, hold up books like Hunger Games and Handmaid's Tale, but also there are so many other stories and authors that we should be turning to, that we should be reading, that we should be lifting up and, learning from and experiencing, especially in regards to modern political parallels. Yes, read those books, but read others as well. Instead of saying just reading this, okay, well, I read that one, that's the end of it. No. Yes, and yes, you read that book. And now read these ones.
And then again, I think that all of those things have cultural significance, right? We're talking about Handmaid's Tale has cultural significance, Hunger Games has cultural significance, but we can also expand upon that, read like parallel to those things, and be able to critique and think critically about these books that we are revering and that we're holding up, and these ideas that we are learning from them and trying to, I guess, push and trying to make more accessible to people. We can use all types of literature to be able to read more critically and learn and be better.
In the end, that's the goal in the end, is to just be better.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of something that I saw on Threads recently. And there is a huge difference between being a big reader and being well read.
Mm-hmm.
Reading a lot of books that's great. That's awesome. Read all the books. Read as many books as you absolutely can. That does not, however, mean that you are well read, because you're not well read if you're not reading books by Black authors, books by Asian authors, books by LGBT authors, books by Indigenous authors. If you are not reading diversely, you are not well read.
Mm-hmm. And I think that one thing that is really important to understand is that reading is a skill. Reading critically and reading and absorbing and being able to retain information, those are skills that have to be built up. And if you want to have that, then you're going to have to work for it a little bit. But I'm going to say, I don't feel there's anything wrong by just reading books. If you're reading books just to turn your brain off, great. I do that too. That makes sense. There are books that I pick up. I know that this one is just going to be a really quick read and I'm going to use 2 brain cells for it. And also, I think that, again, you read those books and add to what you're reading so that you can, I guess, just expand and just experience the richness of life and people and cultures and all of those things. Because, again, it's not just the tragedies that happen to people who are outside your perspective. They also have so much joy and so much love and so much to give the world. If you're only reading a perspective of them being oppressed, then you're still reading from your perspective, right? Or you're still reading from a perspective of a power.
I get what you're saying, though. I get where you're going with it.
Yeah. And so I guess in the sense that making sure you're reading not just about tragedy, but about joy and about love and about success is going to be, I think, the point where you reading diversely is really going to change. Right? It's really going to change your perspective. It's really going to change the way that you read and the way that you see authors of color and authors just in general. Only reading tragedy is only going to further push the narrative that people of color are only ever oppressed. They are only ever taken advantage of, which is prevalent, right? Those things do happen, right? But to also know and see people as human beings and to read stories that enrich other human beings and other cultures, reading joyful stories is going to be what's going to help you to understand those people more.
I personally believe that the best way to go about that is reading romance.
Mm-hmm.
Because romance, you have the happy ending, you have the joy, and you know that that's coming because that is essentially a requirement of being part of the romance genre. So in order to achieve the happier side of these experiences is read non-white, non-straight romance, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many options out there. And I think that romance is also the genre where we see the most diversity in, especially in regards to indie romance authors. I think that is where the largest diversity and representation can be found in regards to books.
And again, if you're talking about people who are not used to reading from outside their perspective, romance is such an accessible thing that most of the people that you know have experienced romance in some sort of way, right? And so to be able to have that stepping point to relate to another story through romance, I think that that is one of the most accessible ways to do so. But yeah, I was thinking about this when we were talking about Hunger Games, and I was trying to think about books that are about oppression and about books that are like alongside Hunger Games and those types of themes. And I do think that sometimes if we ask people to just like jump into it, it can have like the opposite effect that you want. People would just be like, that was so over my head. I don't understand that. Like, and that makes sense. And so again, like having romance as a starting point, and then like being able to expound upon that is going to be, I think, a great way for people who are inexperienced in reading perspectives that are not their own. I always tell my friends, if they like Hunger Games and they wanted to read Hunger Games, read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. But also, I understand that that's kind of a large jump for a lot of people. Like, and not saying that R.F. Kuang is inaccessible, because she is a very popular author. But I also do think that she writes from a perspective, and she lets you know what that perspective is. It's in your face. This is the perspective. This is what's happening. And if you are not used to putting yourself in other people's perspectives and shoes, it might not be like as impactful as it could be.
As a reader, you really have to tackle your implicit bias before you tackle tougher books, The Poppy War or Babel, which was, oh my God, that book was amazing and incredible.
Changed my life.
But it is a lot. It is a lot. And it's, you know, it's a challenging read for many, many reasons. I mean, R.F. Kuang is probably the most beautiful writer of our generation. I would
just
no comparison at all. She is absolutely incredible. And I do recommend reading literally anything she has ever written. Right, down to a grocery list. She could publish her grocery list. I will read it. I will buy it. I will read it. But
and then you'll be interested to know what she buys, because you're like, it contributes to your life. I want to know.
Exactly. But if you're not used to reading diversely, it'll be a lot to chew. It really will be. And I can understand that. And again, you know, that's why I really push for diversity in romance. Start with something a little easier, you know, and as you, I don't want to say expose yourself, but honestly, that's kind of really the best way to do it, is you have to expose yourself to different perspectives and challenge your internal implicit biases and take that step to actively improve yourself and actively seek out other perspectives with an open mind. And really, just the more you read diversely, the easier that is going to be. And the more natural stepping into someone else's perspective will feel to you.
I was actually talking to one of my friends that I recommended a series. I don't know if you read it. It's the Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto. Have you read those ones?
I don't think so. No, I think they're on my Goodreads though.
Oh my gosh. I love those books. They are just hilarious, so well written. But the family is Malay, right? And so she was telling me, I am enjoying it, but it's really hard to read it because there are so many references and ideas that I just don't relate to. I don't understand. It almost feels like I'm encroaching upon something that's just not my space, right? I don't think that, like, yeah, I think that you reading a perspective that you've never experienced before, like the family dynamic between them, if you've never experienced that before, then yeah, that's going to be a little uncomfortable to read, right? But I don't think that that means that you shouldn't read it. I think that that is more of a sign that you should read it, that you should be pushing yourself and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And you can have your comfort reads. I mean, if you read Dial A for Aunties, there's not a lot of political things happening. It's not a Poppy War type of book. It's really just a comedy, mystery, romance all in one type of thing. But still having the ability to push yourself into seeing a culture and a perspective that's not your own, it's going to be more beneficial than you just feeling like, that's not for me, I'm never going to read that.
If it comes to a situation where you are reading a book that is a very new to you culture and a perspective that you are not familiar with, and they're discussing dynamics that you have never experienced and might not fully understand, I mean, there is a really easy way to educate yourself. We literally all have a smartphone attached to us at all times. Just Google it.
Yeah.
Just Google it. Find a chat room or join a book club, or, you know, just ask somebody, you know, post on Threads and say, hey, I'm reading this and I just want to learn more. There's so many different ways to broaden yourself if you're not understanding what you're reading.
Yeah. And it can be something as simple as family dynamics, right?
Yeah.
Simple as something that we all experience. One thing that I promote a lot is Asian authors. And those are family dynamics that I can understand. But sometimes I will recommend a book and one of my friends who is not Asian will be like, how do people live that way? How is that even something that is acceptable in society? And I was, there's a lot to unpack about those questions and the way that you're wording them, but also in the sense, these are stories that people can relate to and they can understand and know. Sometimes I read stories that are from white perspectives and I'm, why would you ever speak to your parents that way? That's insane. But again, it just helps you to understand people a little more, to see people as human beings instead of just seeing what is at face value.
That's honestly, and you hit the nail on the head. I almost said hit the head on the nail. That's not the right. I'm going to say it. You hit the head on the nail.
The head of the hammer.
Yes. How about that one? We actually just took the nail and tapped the hammer with it. Sometimes figures of speech are hard.
It is. You're right. Words are hard.
So this has been a beautiful discussion, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to play just a little bit of a game. This allows our listeners to kind of get to know you as a reader and a bookstagrammer, but will also provide some great recommendations for our listeners to pick up. So this game is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're going to do 5 books that you've read, 4 genres or tropes that you enjoy, 3 authors you always read, 2 places you love to read, and 1 book you promise to read soon. And I'll hold you to it. I'll check in.
Okay.
Like, did you read this yet?
Yeah.
So go ahead. Let's dive in with number 5 books you've read.
Okay. So a book that I always recommend is The Hurricane Wars because I love Thea. I actually had the pleasure of meeting her. She's just a wonderful human being.
So, she really is.
Yeah.
Thea was one of my first podcast interviews for Must Love Books. I believe episode 4.
Oh my gosh.
And she is incredible. She's wonderful. She's beautiful. And I love, love, love Taliesin and Alaric, her main characters of the Hurricane Wars.
They are amazing.
I literally just finished, at the time of recording, I just finished the sequel, A Monsoon Rising, like last week. And
so good.
I died with that cliffhanger. And I'm like, it was such a great middle trilogy book. Mm-hmm. So excellent. I could go on.
It's so hard to find those books that the second book is just as good or built upon just as well. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you'll get a first book and then the second book's kind of like, because it's bridge and it's not as, but man, that book is just, I always recommend that one. Also, she's Filipino and I'm Filipino. And just reading a fantasy from a Filipino perspective was just a life-changing idea for me. I didn't read a book with a Filipino main character until I was 29. And I think that is insane. But now I'm looking and I'm like, man, there are these stories out there. There are these authors who are trying to put these perspectives out there. And now my children, they won't have to wait till they're 29 to see themselves in books, which I am just so excited about for them. The other books series that I always recommend is The Art of Prophecy by Wesley Chu. That really just a great epic fantasy. If you like epic fantasies, I will always read that one over and over again. Now I'm trying to think. Yellowface is one that I think is a great.
Yellowface was my favorite book of 2024.
Yeah, it's such a good one. And I think that there are so many different themes in there that you can get from. You can get from, microaggressions, issues in publishing, issues with maybe writing a perspective that you're not as familiar with. All of those things. There are so many different nuances within that book. And I think that everyone would benefit from reading it. So that's 3, right? I'm looking at my shelf. Daughter of the Moon Goddess, Heart of the Sun Warrior by Sue Lin Tan. I think that you'll find most of my recommendations are going to be like Asian authors because I read a lot of Asian authors. Daughter of the Moon Goddess, Heart of the Sun Warrior, and Immortal that she just came out with. These are more than 5 books, I'm realizing.
You know what? I love the list.
And one book that I would say I really loved was The Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Rubai. It touches on some of the political things that were happening in the Philippines at the time of him writing it, and also the perspective of having immigrant parents and feeling disconnected from your culture because you had never been there or your family's been trying to assimilate to another culture. And so I think it's a really powerful book about how to navigate not only political things that are happening, but also navigate your life as somebody who's trying to figure out just how to be.
It's beautiful. All right. The next one should be a little easier. 4 genres or tropes that you love.
I will always read fantasy. So fantasy is one. Within fantasy, one of my favorite tropes, especially if there's going to be romance, is enemies to lovers, because I think enemies to lovers in fantasy is better done than it is in contemporary romance. Mostly contemporary romance is just like, we don't like each other sometimes, but one of us has been in love with the other one forever. Like within fantasy, their bloodlines have been battling for generations and they're on different sides of the war, and it's just a true enemies to lovers type of thing. So I also really love fake dating. I don't know what it is about fake dating. It's just a little like treat for me. You obviously know that they're going to fall in love, right? Look at these two idiots like thinking that they don't like each other. Like, I feel like I know better than them, but like, yeah, fake dating. I don't know what it is about it. I just love it so much. Also, I really love Brother's Best Friend. And I think the reason why is because that's how I met my husband. It's just like a nostalgic kind of thing for me.
All right. Next, we have 3 authors you always read.
Okay. I will always read R.F. Kuang. Right now, am on like a kick of reading Olive E. Blake and her. So Olive E. Blake is her pen name, and then her I guess given name, Alexine Farrell Fullmoth. So anytime I see her books, I will read them. And then I'm also kind of on an Anne Leong kick right now. Like all her books I've been just collecting and reading them.
2 places that you love to read.
I have a little reading nook where with my shelves, and I just love reading there because it's a space that I built for myself. And so everything in it is mine, and it just feels really cozy. And I also, I guess, my bed, I just like reading in bed.
Me too.
Yeah. I especially love reading on my Kindle in bed because it's just easier. Yeah.
All right. And now for our final one book that you promise you're going to read soon.
Now I'm like, okay, hold on. I really want to read. I'm trying to make sure I get the author right. James by Percival.
By Percival Everett?
Yes, James by Percival Everett. That's the one. So I really want to read that one. I started reading it, but it's been a really long time since I read Huckleberry Finn. So maybe I should read Huckleberry Finn and then read James. But yeah, I really want to make sure I read that this year.
Yeah, that one I've heard is a really fantastic read. I haven't picked it up yet, but I will also put it on my promise to read soon list.
Yeah. Maybe we can like buddy read it or something.
We should. Maybe we should. I actually really hated reading Huck Finn in school. I thought it was just boring and a terrible book and extremely inappropriate for a school setting.
Yeah.
But I am looking forward to the reimagining from Jim's point of view.
I think one thing that I have told my husband is that like reading Huckleberry Finn as a young child, it was like the first time I ever saw a racial slur that was targeted towards Black people. And that's where I learned, don't ever say those things. Again, that's another point to read diversely, is that you can learn so much. I also think Huckleberry Finn is like super boring, but it does have cultural significance. I'm not going to discount it.
All right. Well, Marcella, I have had a wonderful time recording with you today. This has been a true pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It really has been so fun.
Why don't you, before we sign off, tell our listeners about you as a Bookstagrammer and where they can connect with you?
So I have been on Bookstagram for a year. My Bookstagram tag, some people have a really hard time saying it, but it's Ate Marcela Reads __. Ate is a Filipino honorific, meaning older sister. And so to be able to put that into my culture and my background into my Bookstagram, like that's why my name is what it is. On my Bookstagram, you'll find many recommendations of all genres. I try to read very broadly and very diversely. And so you'll find books from all types of authors. And especially if you're looking for Filipino or Asian authors, then I do have a lot of recommendations. And you can see me being silly and fun and trying to just spread good books all around. You can find me on Instagram and message me if you want to talk. I'm always here to talk books.
Always here for the books. Always.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah. That's me.
Thank you again, Marcella, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Must Love Books. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon under @Must Love Books Podcast. Thank you and happy reading.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.